nasty. I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean to hurt him.
21-year-old Brandon Spencer of Englewood bangs his head as a judge sentences him to 40 years to life after he was convicted of shooting a rival gang member at a 2012 Halloween party on the USC campus.
I did not do it, and I'm telling you, I did not do it. Who did it? Oh, no.
When you're a teenager, you still have your whole entire life ahead of you. But some seriously bad choices can take that future away in a heartbeat. Can you imagine being that young, only to know that you'll likely be spending the rest of your life behind bars? The following stories tell the tale of teenagers and other very young people who are faced with life sentences. Can you imagine not only someone heartlessly killing your beloved child, but then smirking in your face while looking at you in court? That is what the family members of University of Wisconsin-Madison film student Nathan Potter had to endure. It was July 6th of 2010, and 21-year-old Nathan was heading back to his Riverside apartment near campus when 18-year-old Shondell Jackson and his accomplice, 19-year-old Derek Thomas, tried to rob him at gunpoint. But the young man had no money on him. So, they shot and killed him. He reportedly used his last words to cry out for help while his killer left him to die. It was determined to be a random robbery attempt, and that the suspects did not know Nathan before that night. Both of them were arrested, with Shondell admitting to the police that he did it because the victim had no money. Derek Thomas, who acted as the lookout, would later say that the reason they had been looking to rob someone that night was because Shondell needed to buy a gun, but had no money for one. The men were tried separately. Throughout the trial, Shondell oozed hatred, at times even leering at the family members of the victim, including his young siblings. Watch as Shondell turns over his shoulder to shoot them a dirty look, while officers struggle to get him to face forward. When Shondell's case was handed over to the jury, it took them no longer than an hour to determine that he was guilty. Shondell, who was 19 years old at the time of the sentencing, was likely facing life behind bars. When his sentencing day arrived, nobody could have expected how evil he would truly behave. Nathan's mother, Denise, said that when she looked at Shondell in court, she did not see a man of remorse. She saw no signs of goodness or humanity at all.
As a parent, you try and teach your children right from wrong, and you try and teach them to be the best person they can. And I didn't see any of that in him.
She gave a testimony in court in which she spoke of the kind-hearted person her son was. Her voice was heavy with emotion as she cried over the beloved child she lost.
They shot him. They dragged him and kicked him to the curb. My son, my kind, loving boy. What kind of people do this? But evil people.
But watch how Shondell responds when his life sentence is officially handed down. Life in prison with no chance of parole. It is an outburst that takes multiple different cops to control him, while his family members can be heard wailing in the background. It took the use of pepper spray to bring Shondell down. If you look in the background, you can see the court staff diving under desks in an attempt to protect themselves from the fumes. But it wasn't just Shondell who showed incredible disrespect to this grieving family. Following the outburst and after he was led away to jail, members of Shondell's family screamed out to the Potters, insulting them. Following this complete nightmare, Nathan's father, John, said he didn't understand how Shondell's parents could have brought up a human being with such hatred towards others.
I mean, how do you raise somebody that has no value for human life? And that's the big mystery here. And what can we do as a society to change that?
Shondell's uncle Gerald was not in the courtroom that day because, unlike the rest of his family members, he didn't support any of their actions. In fact, he was the one who turned Shondell in, despite earning threats from his other family members as a result. He knew there was a chance his own family would retaliate.
If they could act up like that in the courtroom, just imagine what would happen if I'd have been out in the hallway by myself.
Still, he had no regrets and says that his nephew has gotten what he deserves.
You don't have enough time to think about a whole lot of things now, because you just can't take nobody's life. You know, that's just wrong.
Denise Potter later expressed that she and her husband could have never anticipated just how dramatic things ended up becoming in the courtroom that day. She said if they had known, they wouldn't have put their young daughter, Sarah, through all of that horror.
We were praying he would get life. We never thought the drama that would happen, or we wouldn't have brought our 13-year-old daughter.
At least the Potter family knows that their son's killer is locked up, where he won't be able to hurt any other innocent people. A lot of young people dream of achieving fame and attention one day. But what happens when that fame runs out? And how desperate could you be to do something horrible to get it back? Jennifer Mee grew to stardom for one of the strangest reasons you could possibly imagine. Back in 2007, when she was just 15 years old, she developed a very odd and unexplainable condition. She had a constant case of hiccups that rarely let up and interfered with her ability to go to school, enjoy her hobbies, and essentially live a normal life. She began making regular appearances on television shows, including NBC's Today Show, where she talked with doctors about her condition. She earned herself the title, the Hiccup Girl. Were the hiccups ever going to stop?
4 weeks ago tomorrow.
And the sound is the least of it.
I get really bad chest pain, abdominal pains, throat pains, back pains. It's unbelievable.
Luckily for Jennifer, the hiccups did eventually pass, and with them passing, so did the fame she had grown used to enjoying, at least for a little bit. After finding relief from her hiccups, Jennifer hatched a new plan. She met a man by the name of Lamont Newton, and the two of them decided on a scheme to set people up and rob them. By 2010, their plan was already unfolding. She met a 22-year-old man online named Shannon Griffin. She then lured him into a vacant home on the premise that he was coming to see her romantically. But when he arrived, two of her friends robbed and then shot and killed him. He had only $50 on him, which they took. While Jennifer did not shoot the victim, she was an accomplice and was charged with murder. When the day of the verdict arrived, nobody knew what to expect. Jennifer's family filed into the courtroom, hoping for the best, but fearing for the worst.
In just the past half hour, we've seen a flurry of activity right here outside the courthouse as family members from both sides in this case stormed out, emotions running very high, a lot of tears being shed. But the most visibly shaken was Mee's mother. She was not able to make it back into the courtroom for the verdict. When she finally got there and walked in, all that she could see was that her daughter was crying hysterically and handcuffed.
As you can imagine, this was likely not a good sign for Jennifer's mother, who had been hoping for mercy for her daughter. Listen closely as Jennifer receives her verdict.
Be the jury finds as follows: the defendant in this case, the defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged. So say we all.
Watch Jennifer's reaction as she hears the verdict. She knows that her fate is now dire.
Now you can see that Mee broke down right as that verdict was read. She was obviously hoping that the jury would convict her on a lesser charge, perhaps accessory to murder or manslaughter. Now, though, she'll spend the rest of her life behind bars for the murder of Shannon Griffin.
The verdict was shocking to many because it was not Jennifer who physically killed Shannon, but she did play a crucial role in the events that led up to his demise. And because of that, Shannon's family believed justice was served. Unfortunately, though, this doesn't mean that the verdict can bring back this young man, as his mother explained.
We've always wanted it to be about the victim, who is Shannon Griffin. And it's not about it's just, just too much right now because we are still grieving and we just wanted it to be about him.
Following the verdict, you could see Jennifer's mother being let out of court while being supported by family members. She appeared very upset. She knew she wouldn't be able to see her daughter outside of prison walls again. To this day, Jennifer, who remains locked up in a maximum security prison, insists that she never knew what was going to happen that tragic day and that she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. She also claims that a substance misuse played a role.
Got cased up with the wrong crowd of people, really. Unfortunately, when I started experimenting with
because I just felt like I was invincible to everything.
The person who was once known across the nation as the Hiccup Girl is now housed amongst some of the most violent female prisoners in Florida. She says she goes back and forth regarding how she feels about living out the rest of her days behind bars.
And I'm just like, this is a nightmare. You know what I mean? And then there's other days where it's just like, it is what it is.
While Jennifer admits that she helped concoct the plan to rob Shannon, she said she never knew that the plan would include a deadly weapon.
To this day, I still truly don't know and understand what took place for them to do what they did.
On March 19th of 2013, Dylan Shoemaker, who was 16 years old at the time, was babysitting 2 young children in Springville, New York. The children belonged to his then-girlfriend, Ashley Smith, who trusted him to care for them while she was away for the evening. But tragically, by the end of the night, one of the children was dead. The oldest of the 2 children, Austin, was barely 2 years old, and he had been horrifically beaten to death. Dylan was charged with the child's murder, but wait until you hear why Dylan committed this atrocious crime. He said he beat the child to death because he wouldn't stop crying. Tensions were very high when he arrived in court to hear his verdict. Dylan wore an orange jumpsuit as he was escorted by multiple officers. Frank Sedita, the district attorney, talked about the pain the little child was forced to go through. What kind of monster could do this to a baby?
Clearly, if a child or any human being is suffering multiple injuries over a period of time, that conduct is not accidental.
Dylan's attorney and members of his family defended him by saying that he had never intended to hurt the child, but that he just didn't have any kind of experience with babysitting and completely lost his cool and snapped.
He lost his cool, as he said. He got frustrated and he hit the child, but never with the intent to cause serious physical injury or Austin Smith's death.
But it is hard to imagine that Dylan did not have some bad intentions that night, especially as the details surrounding Austin's death began to unfold. Not only did he beat the child, but he put a pillow over his face and held it there to muffle the child's cries. Austin's grandmother, Tracy Smith, said that she believed that at one point, Dylan really did intend to kill Austin, as he could have stepped away and stopped the abuse if he wanted to.
I don't think he started that way. When he initially hit him, I don't think it initially was intent. I think it became intent. At some point, I think he crossed over into intent.
During the sentencing hearing, Dylan began to cry and express remorse. He even talked about how much he supposedly cared for the young boy he heartlessly murdered.
I would give my life for Austin. I loved him a lot.
He even turned to the mother of the child he killed and addressed her in court dramatically.
I didn't mean to kill Austin. Actually, I really didn't. I really think I did. I didn't mean to hurt him.
But would the judge believe his display of remorse and have pity on him? Not exactly. That's because the judge had a piece of the story that Dylan was not aware of. He had a recording of a jail phone call of Dylan, and what he said showed how cruel and calculated he really was.
Record will show that you admitted on July 23rd, 2013, in a phone call to your mother from the holding center, you stated, and I got a quote from the court reporter, "I am a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they're going to feel sorry for me."
But we know that this ultimately is not what happened, as the jury did find him guilty of Austin's murder. The judge called Austin a manipulator and someone who chose to minimize the true evil of his actions. The phone call truly sealed his fate, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Ultimately, however, in 2016, the Court of Appeals did agree to appeal Dylan's life sentence. He will now be eligible for parole in 2031 after spending at least 18 years behind bars. He is currently 26 years old and has only served 9 years of that sentence. At a Halloween party in October 2012, a young man named Brandon Spencer would get into an altercation with another man that would change his life forever. The party was taking place at the University of Southern California campus when an argument between Brandon and someone said to be a rival gang member broke out. While nobody was killed, 4 people were wounded. Brandon was convicted on 4 counts of attempted murder in what would become a very controversial case. In April 2014, Brandon received a sentence that many would view as shockingly harsh. He was sentenced to 40 years to life behind bars. Watch as Brandon slammed his head upon the desk in despair. While in tears, Brandon begged the judge for his life.
I'm sorry for what happened, Your Honor, but I need some life in prison. And I'm not a bad person, but I made mistakes. I'm not just some gangbanger that she tried to betray me at.
While it was said that the sentence was as harsh as it was in an attempt to meet demands for increased safety on the USC campus, many people felt that Brandon did not deserve to spend the rest of his life behind bars. His father spoke out on his behalf.
Show me the proof that this kid is a notorious gang member. My son's getting 40 years to life, and they got different descriptions of what took place.
But it's not just Brandon's own family members that think the sentence is unfair. Even some people who originally were relieved to hear the verdict didn't think that the judge should have locked this man up and thrown away the key.
I took a step back and actually looked at the situation, and I felt like although he came there with those intentions, I don't think he was deserving of 40 years to life. That's completely wrong, especially since he doesn't even get an opportunity to learn from the situation.
Even though it has been quite a few years since this case took place, people are still discussing it. In fact, on June 15th, 2020, a person named Sky Larson started a petition for Brandon on change.org. The petition is titled Free Brandon Spencer and has a goal of reaching at least 25,000 signatures. So far, it has brought in 17,900 signatures from people who want to see Brandon get a second chance at life. The petition suggests that Brandon was never actually the shooter that night, but that law enforcement came up with a story to paint him as the suspect and convict him. The goal of the petition is not only to get signatures, but to spread awareness about Brandon's case and to hope that it one day gets reopened so that he can have a second chance. As for now, he remains behind bars. Do you think that Brandon Spencer is deserving of a second chance to try to prove his innocence? Let us know in the comments. In May 2019, Marty Fuller, who was only 15 years old at the time, came up with a deadly plot to get revenge. He was angry at his ex-girlfriend, Kaylee Jugga, who was also 15 years old at the time. He blamed her for getting him expelled from school, and as a result, he was also kicked off the football team. Martise, despite his young age, was able to get his hands on a gun and borrowed some ammunition from a friend. He then carried out his attack, killing Kaylee and injuring her mother, Stephanie Jugga. The deadly attack occurred while Kaylee and Stephanie were residing in their home in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The scene was like something out of a horror movie. Martise, having been in the Jugga home before, knew the layout well, which helped him with his attack. He even cased the home before the deadly attack took place. Kaylee had just returned home from school, and she and her mom were upstairs. It was supposed to be a happy evening as they were packing for an upcoming camping trip. Sadly, things would soon turn tragic when Martise broke into the home from the garage and shot Kaylee 5 times.
Now at noon, the Kenosha teen believed to be the lone suspect in the death of a young girl and wounding her mother surrenders to police. Kenosha police say 15-year-old Marty Fuller was arrested at a house in Racine around 6:30 this morning.
Despite the fact that Martise had been brought into custody and the active threat against the community was gone, many neighbors were terrified by the incident and demanded that changes be made surrounding gun violence.
I think it's really easy for us to keep looking the other way every time that someone gets hurt and it's not your kid's school or it's not your family. And there are a lot of families who live in all of these adjoining subdivisions here hundreds and hundreds of us. And yesterday, it literally hit home.
Martise was charged with multiple crimes, including murder, attempted murder, and burglary. He pleaded not guilty to the charges. Watch as Martise entered the courtroom to enter his plea. It's almost hard to believe he was just 15 years old at the time. He was charged as an adult for his crimes.
Dressed in jailhouse blues, handcuffed and head hanging low, 15-year-old Martise Fuller stepped into a Kenosha County courtroom, escorted by a sheriff's deputy.
Throughout the trial, there would be multiple different witnesses. The first was Detective Jason Kenzie, who described young Kaylee's severe injuries.
There were 4 gunshot wounds to Kaylee's chest, 1 gunshot wound to her head. The cause of death was from multiple gunshot wounds.
But the witness that brought about the most emotion had to be Stephanie, Kaylee's mom, who recounted the events of that tragic night through tears.
And what happened after you heard her scream?
I heard I stopped in my doorway and I looked at him and I said, "Oh my God, Martise." I said, "Please, you don't have to do this." And he looked at me and he said, "Yes, I do."
It would come out during the trial that the Jugga family had been nothing but generous and kind throughout the years. After he'd gotten kicked out of his house and had nowhere to stay, Stephanie even allowed him to come over and stay at her house, sometimes at night. But when his relationship with Kaylee went wrong, everything took a deadly turn. Throughout the proceedings, Martise would often become emotional, at times even resting his head on the table. Michael Gravey, the Kenosha County District Attorney, went into detail regarding the purposeful steps Martise took leading up to the killing.
This defendant took her love and affection, took her bravery and gentleness, and he deliberately and he violently made it so she could never move on.
It was Stephanie who was about to identify Martise following the shooting, but the defense suggested that because of all the craziness going on and considering where she was in the home, she could have named the wrong person. The prosecution said this was simply not possible.
The identification of Martise Fuller by Stephanie Jugga is without doubt.
The jury deliberating 3.5 hours to reach its decision.
In March of 2021, Martise would face the jury's verdict for his crimes. He was just 17 years old at the time.
The verdicts read as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
The day of the sentencing would eventually come, and Martise knew his future wasn't looking very bright. He wrote a handwritten letter that his lawyer read aloud for him, in which he maintained his innocence and said he wasn't the person he had made him out to be.
So I am sorry. Despite the hatred that is against me, I still am sorry. But I have to continue to stand innocent because I am.
But the judge didn't seem to believe that his apology was sincere and had only harsh words for him ahead of sentencing.
I don't have any ability to trust that you will never commit these acts. You are a very dangerous and a damaged human being.
The judge told Martise that she believed that if she gave him a second chance at life behind bars, that he would be a danger to the public.
I hope that you can right yourself in your life, in your daily life, but it won't be among the community. It was all too calculated. So in the interest of protecting the public, acknowledging the seriousness of these acts, the court orders that on count 1, you are sentenced to life in prison without eligibility for extended supervision.
This essentially means that Martise will never see freedom outside of prison again. Nicholas Lindsay, born in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1995, is a young man with a very troubled past. He became involved in crime at a very early age, and his life only seemed to unravel further and further from there. Even some of his earliest crimes were incredibly serious and violent, including grand theft and trespassing. And that was only the beginning. By the time Nicholas was 16 years old, he was still involved in a life of crime, but he was about to take things to an even more dangerous level. It was February February 21st of 2011, when David Crawford, a 46-year-old police officer who had been in the force for 25 years, saw something suspicious. He had received a call from a concerned neighbor who reported an unknown man standing in his backyard while holding a brick. He believed the man may be trying to rob him. When Officer Crawford arrived at the scene, he saw a figure stepping out of a car. This figure was Nicholas Lindsay. When Officer Crawford approached Nicholas to question him, Nicholas opened fire on him, shooting him 5 times. The gun Nicholas used had been purchased illegally for $150. The only things Officer Crawford had been holding at the time of the attack were a notebook and a pen. Sadly, he would later die in the hospital.
But it's the moments leading up to the shooting that help answer why the team was so desperate to get away.
Mr. Lindsay was in the area trying to break into a vehicle and steal a vehicle at the scene.
A massive manhunt would then begin, involving more than 200 officers and many members of the community, all desperate to capture Nicholas. By the following day, police received a tip about his whereabouts and were able to bring him into custody. While there are differing reports about what happened next, police say that Nicholas eventually broke down and admitted to the murder, as well as to having thrown the gun into the river. He was charged with murder and held in juvenile detention while he awaited trial. His trial would begin the following year in March 2012. Nicholas's defense tried to portray him as a scared young boy who was afraid of getting into trouble and simply acted on impulse. This was in an attempt to get him convicted of a lesser charge, like manslaughter instead of murder.
Lindsay walked into court this morning wearing a white dress shirt, no tie. About 75 potential jurors followed. The 12 that are picked will decide Lindsay's guilt or innocence.
Nicholas was ultimately convicted of Officer Crawford's murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. It seemed as if this was the end of the road for Nicholas, but the teen and his legal staff ended up filing an appeal. In October 2013, Nicholas sat in court to see if the court would reconsider the sentence. Ultimately, it was upheld, which means that this young man will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Just watch Nicholas's face as he finds out he's been re-sentenced. His smirk just shows how unremorseful he really is. The smirk was not missed by anyone in the courtroom, including Officer Crawford's grieving daughter, Amanda.
Justice was served, and I'm glad it's over, and it just kind of proves to me that he's an animal as he sat there smiling.
If there is anything to learn from these tragic stories, is that it only takes one bad mistake when you are young to possibly ruin the rest of your life. And there may not be anything you can do to fix the harm that has already been done. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.